We'll take a deep dive into the truth about the crime explosion in America with John Lott on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Hope you subscribe to it, leave a rating and a review. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, and Conservative Television of America. Same thing. Please subscribe, hit that notification button so every time the show airs, you will be notified. And leave a rating and a review and let your friends know about this podcast. We appreciate that. There's been an explosion in crime like we've never seen in this country, at least not in my lifetime. And hint, America, it's not about the gun. Because if you put a gun on a table and you leave it there, it's not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to rob anybody. And it's not going to kill anybody. So what's this about? My guest is ready to tell you. Ready to find out? Well, let's get into it. He's an economist and a world-recognized expert on guns and crime who served in the U.S. Department of Justice during the Trump administration. He's had more than 100 articles published, has written 10 books. I welcome to the show a certified authority I've wanted to talk to for quite some time, the founder president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, Mr. John Lott. John, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks very much for having me on.
John, we need to have you on because people need to hear what you have to say. You know, back in the day, there was a comic, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's dead now, Richard Pryor. And he had a little routine. Sure. He talked about when a guy went to the unemployment office. And he went to the unemployment office and he says to the lady, "I'd like a job." And she looks at the forms he fills out and she goes, "Mr. Pryor, you have a criminal record." And he goes, "Well, yeah, I'm a criminal." So the point I want to try and figure out, John, what has happened that, we grew up with cops and robbers, good guys, bad guys, outlaws, lawmen, and to think 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that the gun is the they would have been laughed out of the country. What happened?
Right. Well, I mean, 92% of violent crime has nothing to do with guns. And, it's interesting that the same people who want to make it difficult for police or the legal system to go and do its job, to go and punish criminals, also want to make it difficult for law-abiding citizens to be able to go and protect themselves. I mean, the one commonality there is that they don't want to make it risky for criminals to go and commit crimes, either from worrying about the police or worrying about a civilian being able to go and protect themselves. And, it's pretty simple logic. It's not like it's rocket science. If you make it more difficult for criminals to commit crime in different ways, you will have less crime. And, it's one of the reasons why we've seen this explosion in violent crime over the last few years, particularly in major urban areas where law enforcement has essentially collapsed. And we've seen a huge increase in violent and property crime as a result.
I hear you. Now, let's take it back to the genesis of this. Why did it happen? Did you see it coming before you started your research center, or did you start your research center because you saw this and said, I have to do something about this to alert the people, because this isn't about guns, as you said. This is about crime prevention, and they are doing a bait and switch, and it looks like America has bought it, or some of America has bought it.
Right. Well, I think to some extent they want to go and blame guns because they don't want to take responsibility for their own policies and the outcomes that it's had. So you have places like Chicago, which may have had huge cuts in the number of police, which, in some recent years, the arrest rate for murder is in the, teen percentage rate, under 20%. And, if you don't make it risky for criminals to commit crime, as I say, you're going to have more crime. but they don't want to take responsibility for their policies, and so they want to blame something else, and so they go and they blame national gun control laws or something. But look, if my research convinces me of anything, it's the very people that the Democrats claim that they care most about, which are harmed by strict gun control laws. They're also the ones who are most harmed by their policing policies that you have. It's basically poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. The people who are the most likely victims of violent crime benefit the most from having the option to be able to go and protect themselves. The other group of people that my research shows benefit the most from having guns are people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. You're almost always talking about a young male criminal doing the attack. And when a man is attacking a woman or an elderly person, there's a lot larger strength difference that exists there than when a man is attacking another man. And the presence of a gun for those people who are relatively weaker represents a much bigger relative change in their ability to go and protect themselves and stop an attack.
I'm going to ask you the obvious question based on what you just said. And of course, the answer is going to cause my head to explode again. Okay, you look at a lot of urban areas all around the country, you're right, high crime. So why is it the people in those communities don't hold the Democratic Party responsible for the leadership they put and trying to take the guns away from private citizens so all the criminals will have guns? Why do they keep voting for these people, and how do they get away with it? How do they sell that message? Like we see killings, Chicago is like Gunsmoke every weekend. And it's gotten to the point we're desensitized to it. How do they get away with this, and why are people putting up with it?
Well, I mean, there are lots of issues besides crime that are puzzling. You look at education, you have horrible failing public schools in these areas. Seems to me you'd want to have some type of competition between the schools. I mean, nobody would want to have the government producing all the cars or the computers or whatever. I don't think most people think you'd get very good quality products if you had the government doing it. But yet somehow they want to have the government produce education. And my belief is that the people who would benefit the most from having competition in education are the ones who are in those urban areas, those heavily poor urban areas. But so there's a range of issues that one can talk about that's a puzzle. And I think certain people have just been convinced that the other people are racist, that they hate them in some way. And so they look past these individual issues that are there. But, as far as policy goes, I think those are the very people who would most benefit from having basically more conservative type of policies to protect them.
It still amazes me, because they look and they can see in other areas, they can look in the suburbs right around the corner and just see it's completely different. It's amazing to me. John, did you ever think in your wildest dream that a political party and political leaders would say, let's defund the police, and people would go, yeah, that's a really good idea?
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at surveys, and basically the people who live in those poor, high crime areas, heavily minority areas, actually want to have more police. The bizarre thing is you have a small group of criminals out there who are committing the crime. And it's more than just the direct victims of crime. Obviously, the people who are raped and robbed and assaulted are badly hurt. But it's broader than that. You have businesses in those areas closed down. Who disproportionately owns those businesses? The same type of people. Who works in those stores? Heavily minority areas. Who shops in those stores? Who owns homes in those areas? Criminals tend to commit crimes near their home. And the victims tend to be of the same race and socioeconomic background as the criminals that are there. And so, the Democrats claim that they care about the poor, that they care about minorities, and they go and they protect poor minority criminals. But there are many, many, many more people who are very similar in many different ways who are being harmed. 90% of blacks are murdered by blacks. And so, and that's, you have people of the same race basically committing other violent crimes and property crimes against each other. And so, if they really cared about those groups of people that they claim that they care about, I think they'd be much more worried about the victims, and again, not just the direct victims of crime, but all the other indirect damage that's done.
Hear what you're saying, John. I want to take this back to what I've always talked about. That the genesis of this, to me, goes back to Karl Marx. That in order to institute socialism, to have statism, to have government control, total control of all the private sector, the first thing you have to do, you have to get God out, because people will either look to a benevolent God, a lot of people, or government, but not both. So you need to get God out of pictures. Then you got to get rid of the guns. You've got to take the guns from private citizens. So as Venezuela found out, is finding out as Cuba and all these other countries, when you want to get your country back from tyranny, they have military-style weapons. You have pop guns. Is that what this is about on the left? Is this about disarming us, so if they take over and become totally tyrannical, we can't fight back?
I don't know what's going through people's minds. I think, to the extent that you have these types of gun control regulations, you make people more dependent upon the government in general. I don't think they're necessarily thinking about totalitarianism, but it's pretty straightforward there who gets harmed, and those are the types of questions that I can answer. Okay,
well, we see who's getting harmed. Do you see any solutions on the horizon?
Yeah, educating people on this, just the types of discussions that we're having.
Well, who's doing that beside you and a couple other people? It just seems that this is something that you're not hearing a lot about. It's almost like people who believe in the Second Amendment, I'm not saying they're hiding under a rock, but they've just gotten so much pushback that it's very, very hard for people to stand up for the Second Amendment and stand up and say, this is what's really going on here. So tell us about your organization and what you do, and the type of progress or the type of impact you believe it's having.
Well, I mean, we're basically a group of academics, the Crime Prevention Research Center. People can see our work at crimeresearch.org. I've been an academic most of my life. I've been at Stanford, University of Chicago, the Wharton Business School, Yale, UCLA. I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and I was senior advisor for research and statistics in the Department of Justice, the Office of Justice Programs, and the Office of Legal Policy. So, I've dealt a lot with data, and we have other academics from Harvard, University of Chicago, University of Michigan, Wharton, who are on our academic advisory board. And so we basically know where the numbers are on things. And we go and, try to put out research and studies to go and educate people on these types of issues, on crime generally, everything from policing to gun control, to vote fraud, to anything that has anything to do with crime, we try to look at.
Is there one statistic that America would be shocked? Since you have a think tank of numbers here and people crunching numbers, is there one statistic that you can give us that if America said, gosh, oh my gosh?
Well, I mean, one thing, just recently, it's hard to know which one number to bring up, but law enforcement
bring out a
in the
couple.
United States has basically collapsed. You look at large cities, for example, in the 5 years prior to COVID, 44% of violent crimes result in arrest. It started falling in 2020. And by 2022, for those cities, it was down to 20%. That's over a 50% drop in the arrest rate. I've never seen such a drop like that. And that's arrest for reported crimes. You end up having an even bigger drop when you're talking about total crimes, because as the arrest rates have plummeted, you see people are less likely to go and report crimes to the police. So if you look at, for cities over 1 million, what you find is that only 8% of total violent crimes reported unreported result in arrest, and only 1% of total property crimes result in arrest. And that's just because somebody's arrested doesn't mean that they're charged, let alone prosecuted or convicted. And so in many parts of this country, you have it's very little risk for criminals to commit different types of crime. To me, that's pretty shocking, and it's a huge change from what it was even just a few years ago. That's probably the most shocking thing to me.
Would you say that sanctuary cities has a lot to do with this going on? Because they're just standing down, they're just arrest, catch and release and everything. It has sanctuary cities kind of changed the equation?
I don't think that they've helped. But I think there's lots of things that are going on. You've had cuts in police budgets. You've had large numbers of retirements of police officers in the country. You've had district attorneys in many major urban areas who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals or property crimes at all. You have bail reform, which, you look at some of these things. I was reading a little while ago about a case in Michigan where a guy had murdered 3 people. Was released on $10,000 in bail, which basically meant he had to put up $1,000. And he went out and murdered somebody else. He's already facing 3 life sentences. You say, well, if you threaten to take away his 4th life, that will keep him from committing more crimes. It's just doesn't make a lot of sense there. There are other changes that they've made. And so you just, it's not, as we talked about before, not rocket science. If you make it so that it's not risky for criminals to commit crime, you're going to get more crime. But it's easy to explain why the arrest rates have gone down. If you cut the number of police, if you've lowered your standards for the police that you have, if you have lots of retirements for police, even if you go back and try to hire somebody now, somebody who's been on the job for 6 months or a year isn't going to be able to go and do a good job of replacing somebody who had 15 years of experience. And so you have real problems that are there. You've had, when criminals get immediately released and put back on the street, you demoralize the police. It's risky for them to go and arrest people. Why should they go and take those types of risks if the person's going to be immediately released and nothing's going to happen? In California, you have a situation where if police pull over somebody for a traffic stop and they give them a citation, they have to spend maybe 45 minutes filling out forms about who they pulled over and why they pulled them over. They have to go and guess things like the sexual orientation of the person that they pulled over. So what happens is that police don't want to have to fill out all that paperwork, and so they pull over fewer people than they would have otherwise.
Oh boy. There used to be a time, and I know you grew up in it, where law and order meant something. When you heard law and order, law and order wasn't a curse word. Law and order wasn't something you'd run away from. Law and order was something that you wanted. You wanted law and order on your street. You wanted law and order in your community. You wanted law and order I remember when the policeman was your friend. You were glad he was around. You were glad you could see somebody in the blue because, there's people out there with bad intentions. What the heck has happened to where America, for some reason, I'm not saying all of America, but there just seems to be too much America that exactly what you're talking about, they're going the opposite direction. They're making it look like law and order is the problem.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess they have to try to justify the changes that they have that are there, but, it's you go back and look at the statements from Kamala Harris or even Biden during just a few years ago. They were very clear. Kamala Harris many times has said she doesn't think that having more police helps reduce crime. That we need to move some of the police budget away from policing and into welfare or into other things, healthcare for people. And, to me, you may want to help people in other ways, but the most direct way to go and reduce crime is to make it costly for criminals to go and commit crime.
We're watching people stealing up to $999 at the stores, businessmen. This is just so horrible, John. Are people starting to catch on? Are people starting to say, look, we need to get back to law and order. We need to get back to policing. We need to get back to, having this community safe again, because it's almost like if they win this election, and I'm talking about the Democrats again, I'm afraid to even see what it'll look like.
All right. Well, I mean, a lot's at stake in this election, depending upon which side people are on. By the end of this year, Democrats will control something like 70% of the circuit and district court judges in the country. And by the end of the next term, Clarence Thomas will be 80. Sam Alito will be 78. You lose one or both of those guys, you'll have a very different Supreme Court. And right now you see with the Democrats controlling so many of the circuit courts, all these games being played about how they're delaying cases or making decisions on cases. You just had an amazing case out of the Fourth Circuit that occurred. And you have California, the Ninth Circuit, the Seventh Circuit, all of them playing games because they think they can get away with this because the Supreme Court only takes about 60 to 70 cases a year. The circuit courts hear about 120,000. And so it's just, so anyway, you're going to have a situation where the Democrats will completely control the court systems, probably by the end of the next administration. They're pretty much control virtually all of it now, except for the Supreme Court. And, you're going to have even more of the types of policies that you've been talking about.
Trump has to win this election, John. John, as you probably figured out by now, what my show is and what I do, I bring guests on to tell people the truth, things that they may not be able to hear on network TV for a wide variety of reasons. So we get down to the truth, and the truth usually scares the heck out of people. But we always end the show by giving them hope. So now that we have them on the ledge, hanging off by their fingernails, please give them a reason for hope.
Well, I mean, the hope is that it's pretty clear what types of policies that you want to have. If you want to reduce crime, you don't want to have this big increase in crime. You have to make it risky and costly for people to commit crimes. And there's surely a lot of states in this country, whether it's Florida and Texas or some others, which understand that you need to let individuals protect themselves, particularly the most vulnerable people. And you also need to have policing out there. And they don't have the crime problems that some other places have. So, I think there are people who understand it, and I think more people understand it. And I think the fact that Kamala Harris has had to walk back and pretend, or at least her campaign, she hasn't made any statements yet about no longer supporting defunding the police, no longer promising to confiscate guns that people have through executive orders, no longer saying that she wants to have a completely open border and providing, free health care and everything else to illegal aliens. At least shows to me that, even the Democrats realize that the types of views that they have, that they've been implementing, aren't popular with a lot of people. Now, whether people are going to know that those, aren't just some temporary conversion for 90 days before the election or not is a different question. But it still shows that, that even the Democrats understand where people's views are on these things.
I hear you. John, thanks for coming on with me and talking about crime prevention. Please tell people how they can reach you, your organization, and anything you'd like to promote.
Well, our website is crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org, and we have all the research that we've been talking about is available there. Okay. John, thank you. Keep up what you're doing because, we need help in this area because I think they want lawlessness because lawlessness leads to big government and government takeover so they can quell everything that they like the thing, start the thing, create all this havoc, and then say they have to come in and correct it with big government. We can't. No. John, thank you very much for coming on and continued success. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a good day. There you have it, Mr. John Lott. I want to thank John Lott for coming on and telling us about the crime explosion that's going on in our country. Not good. But also what can be done for crime prevention. That we need a lot of. And one of the big takeouts to me about this, we cannot let the Democratic Party win this upcoming presidential election. If so, I don't even think, you think it's bad now? Oh gosh, I don't even want to think what America will look like as it applies to law enforcement and crime prevention. So John, keep doing what you're doing, keep educating because it is greatly needed. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find the video version at YouTube, Rumble, and Conservative Television of America. Either way, please subscribe, hit that notification button, leave a rating and a review, and make sure to tell your friends about the show. If you do go to Radio Influence and the United Patriots Uprising page, you can find the archive of the audio shows. Previously, more than 175 high-profile guests. Many have been on the show several times. And what they said then is just as valid today. Some of the people that were on that you'll find there, Tom Holman, Lucretia Hughes, Carrie Lake, Alex Newman, Judge Janine Pirro, Wayne Allen Root, Nick Searcy, Christina Bobb, A.F. Branco, Ben Carson, Clay Clark, Monica Crowley, Kira Davis, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Pastor Jack Hibbs, Carol Swain, Will Witt, just a few. So we hope you'll go and check out some of those shows. Well, that's all for now, everyone. So until the next time, this is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.